The Hoatzin, also known as the stinkbird, or kanji pheasant, is a species of tropical bird found in swamps, riparian forest and mangrove of the Amazon and the Orinoco Delta in South America. It is notable for having chicks that possess claws on 2 of their wing digits. It is the only member of the genus Opisthocomus, which in turn is the only extant genus in the family Opisthocomidae. The taxonomic position of this family has been greatly debated, and is still far from clear. Description: the Hoatzin is pheasant-sized, with a total length of 65 centimeters, with a long neck and small head. It has an unfeathered blue face with maroon eyes, and its head is topped by a spiky, rufous crest. The long, sooty brown tail is broadly tipped buff. The upper parts are dark, sooty brown edged buff on the wing covers, and streaked buff on the mantle and nape. The underparts are buff, while the crisp, primaries, underwing covers and flanks are rich rufous chestnut, but this is mainly visible when it opens its wings. The alternative name of stinkbird is derived from the bird's manure-like odor, caused by its digestive system. The Hoatzin is a herbivore, eating leaves and fruit, and has an unusual digestive system with an enlarged crop used for fermentation of vegetable matter, in a manner broadly analogous to the digestive system of mammalian ruminants. This is a noisy species, with a variety of hoarse calls, including groans, croaks, hisses and grunts. These calls are often associated with body movements, such as wing spreading. Calls are used to maintain contact between individuals and groups, warn of threats and intruders, and by chicks begging for food. Taxonomy, systematics and evolution. The Hoatzin was originally described by German zoologist Statius Marwan-Korteler in 1776. It is arguably the most enigmatic living bird in regard to its phylogenetic relationships. No satisfying evolutionary hypothesis has been proposed, and the situation has become worse with the availability of DNA sequence data. There has been much debate about the Hoatzin's relationships with other birds. Because of its distinctness, it has been given its own family, the Opisthocomidae, and its own suborder, the Opisthocomi. At various times, it has been allied with such taxa as the tinamous, the galliforms, the rails, the bustards, seriamas, sandrows, doves, chiracos and other cuculiforms, and mousebirds. Altogether, it has been most frequently suggested to be related to galliforms, chiracos, or the anis. History of the debate: placement with the game birds is historical, based mainly on phonetic considerations of external morphology, which are considered unreliable and generally dismissed today. The game birds together with the waterfowl are classified as gallo and soray, whereas the Hoatzin are not. Cladistic analysis of skeletal characters, on the other hand, supports a relationship of the Hoatzin to the Seriama family Cariamidae, and more distantly to the chiraco and cuckoo families. However, cuckoos have zygodactyl feet and chiracos are semi-zygodactylous, whereas the Hoatzin has the more typical anisodactyl foot with 3 toes forward, 1 backwards. The evolution of avian dactyly, on the other hand, is not entirely resolved to satisfaction. Sibley and Ahlquist in 1990 considered it likely to be a basal cuckoo based on DNA hybridization. Avise al. in 1994 found mtDNA cytochrome B sequence data to agree with Sibley and Ahlquist's previous treatment. Subsequently, Hughes and Baker in 1999 proclaimed to have resolved the relationships of the Hoatzin to be with chiracos, based on their own analysis of 6 sets of mtDNA and 1 of nDNA sequences. However, using MT and nDNA sequences of increased length, Sorensen al. in 2003 noted that all 3 previous DNA studies were apparently flawed due to errors in methodology, small sample size, and sequencing errors. Their study strongly suggested against a close relationship between the Hoatzin and cuckoos or chiracos. It was not possible, though, to reliably determine the Hoatzin's closest living relatives. Even though it tended to group with doves, this was not at all well supported, with little more than 10% likelihood at best that such an arrangement was accurate according to Sorensen al.'s analysis. Fain and Hood in 2004 proposed a dichotomy in the neoovs based on I-squared fibrinogen intron 7 sequences. In their suggested phylogeny, the Hoatzin was a basal member of the Metaves, a proposed clade that would include many other historically problematic bird families, such as flamingos, grebes, tropic birds, sandgrouse and msites. While the doves did also group with the Metaves, no close relationship between these and the Hoatzin within Metaves was recovered. While the other major Neo-avian lineage, Coronaves, largely agreed in its internal phylogeny with what is currently emerging as consensus, the interrelationships of the Metaves were not resolvable. Nor do supposed Metavian groupings like flamingos and nightjars or tropic birds and hummingbirds seem to have a factual basis rather than being artifactually grouped based on molecular homoplosis or lack of informative characters within the group, as Fain and Hood originally suggested. Metaves instead may be a wastebasket taxon. It seems probable that the taxa included in the Metaves by Fain and Hood contain some good clades, such as Caprimulgiums, the Mirandornis, or the Apodiforms. Considering that some odd gruiforms, which might be each other's closest living relatives, make up most of the remaining Metaves, the doves, the Hoatzin, and sandgrouse would remain as Metaves incerta sedis. This would seem to suggest that the Hoatzin is at least more closely related to doves than to many of the other purported Coronavian families that previously have been suggested. Subsequent multigene studies of Erickson al. 2006 and of Hackett al. 2008 corroborated the Metaves clades, dependent on the inclusion of 1 and 2 genes respectively, but the latter did not recover the Hoatzin with Metaves. More recently, Hood embarked on sequencing the entire genome of the Hoatzin. As of 2011, it was reported that more than 1.4 billion base pairs of Hoatzin DNA had been sequenced, roughly equal to its entire haploid genome, but that only about 2.4% of its genome had yet been assembled. Completion of this project would be welcomed for more reasons than resolution of Hoatzin relationships. Out of the diverse class Aves, the genomes of no more than 4 species of birds including of the waterfowl, fowl and songbirds have been sequenced. Moreover, much might be learned by coordinating these efforts with that of the metagenomic analysis of the Hoatzin for gut ruminant bacterial microflora. More data has probably been analyzed for the Hoatzin than for any other non-rotite bird. As can be seen, not even unequivocal distant relatives can be determined. Thus, those that place the Hoatzin into an order of its own, Opisthocomiforms, might express the continuing uncertainty most adequately. Fossil record. With respect to other material evidence, the undisputed fossil record of the Hoatzins consists of a single backside of the cranium of a fossil Hoatzin, specimen UCMP 42823. It is of Miocene origin and was recovered in the upper Magdalena River Valley, Colombia in the well-known fauna of La Venta. This has been placed into a distinct, less derived genus, Hoatzinoides, but clearly would be placed into the same family as the extant species. It markedly differs insofar as that the cranium of the living Hoatzin is characteristic, being much domed, rounded, and shortened, and that these autapomorphies were less pronounced in the Miocene bird. Miller discussed these findings in the light of the supposed affiliation of the Hoatzins and the Galliforms, which was the favored hypothesis at that time, but had been controversial almost since its inception. He cautioned, however, that Hoatzinoides by no means establishes a phyletic junction point with other Galliforms. For obvious reasons, as we know today. Anything other than the primary findings of Miller are not to be expected in any case, as by the time of Hoatzinoides, essentially all modern bird families are either known or believed to have been present and distinct. Going further back in time, the late Eocene or early Oligocene phyla Holinus from France has also been considered proof of a link between the Hoatzin and the game birds. The fragmentary fossil Onychopteryx from the Eocene of Argentina and the quite complete but no less enigmatic early Middle Eocene Phoropinarium are sometimes used to argue for a Hoatzin cuculiform link. But as demonstrated above, this must be considered highly speculative, if not as crassly off the mark as the relationship with Crassidae discussed by Miller. Hoatzinovis is an extinct genus of early Hoatzin from late Oligocene and early Miocene deposits of Brazil. It was collected in 2008 from the Tremember copyright formation of Sao Paulo, Brazil. It was first named by Gerald Mayer, Herculano Alvarenga and Carr. Copyright Keelmora Schauvera. Copyright in 2011 and the type species is Hoatzin lacustris. Namibiavis is an extinct genus of early Hoatzin from early Middle Miocene deposits of Namibia. It was collected from a Rhys Drift, southern Namibia. It was first named by Carr. Copyright Keelmora Schauvera. Copyright in 2003 and the type species is Namibiavis inuti. Behavior: feeding. The Hoatzin eats the leaves and to a lesser degree fruits and flowers of the plants which grow in the marshy and riverine habitats where it lives. It clambers around clumsily among the branches, and being quite tame, often allows close approach and is reluctant to flush. The Hoatzin uses a leathery bump on the bottom of its crop to help balance itself on the branches. It was once thought that the species could only eat the leaves of arums and mangroves, but the species is now known to consume the leaves of over 50 species. One study undertaken in Venezuela found that the Hoatzin's diet was 82% leaves, 10% flowers and 8% fruit. One of this species' many peculiarities is that it has a digestive system unique amongst birds. Hoatzins use bacterial fermentation in the front part of the gut to break down the vegetable material they consume, much like cattle and other ruminants. Unlike ruminants, however, which possess the rumen, the Hoatzin has an unusually large crop, folded in two chambers, and a large, multi-chambered lower esophagus. Its stomach chamber and gizzard are much smaller than in other birds. The crop of the Hoatzin is so large as to displace the flight muscles and keel of the sternum, much to the detriment of their flight capacity. Because of aromatic compounds in the leaves they consume and the bacterial fermentation, the bird has a disagreeable, manure-like odor and is only hunted by humans for food in times of dire need. Any feeding of insects or other animal matter is purely accidental. Breeding: Hoatzins are seasonal breeders, breeding during the rainy season, whose the exact timing varies across its range. Hoatzins are gregarious and nest in small colonies, laying 2 or 3 eggs in a stick nest in a tree hanging over water in seasonally flooded forests. The chicks, which are fed on regurgitated fermented food, have another odd feature. They have 2 claws on each wing. Immediately on hatching, they can use these claws, and their oversized feet, to scramble around the tree branches without falling into the water. When predators such as the great black hawk attack a Hoatzin nesting colony, the adults fly noisily about, trying to divert the predator's attention, while the chicks move away from the nest and hide among the thickets. If discovered, however, they drop into the water and swim under the surface to escape, then later use their clawed wings to climb back to the safety of the nest. This has inevitably led to comparisons to the fossil bird Archaeopteryx, but the characteristic is rather an autapomorphy, possibly caused by an atavism towards the dinosaurian finger claws, whose developmental genetics presumably is still in the avian genome. Since Archaeopteryx had 3 functional claws on each wing, some earlier systematists speculated that the Hoatzin was descended from it, because nestling Hoatzins have 2 functional claws on each wing. Modern researchers believe that the young Hoatzin's claws are of more recent origin, however, and may be a secondary adaptation from its frequent need to leave the nest and climb about in dense vines and trees well before it can fly. Relationship with humans: though conspicuous even attractive at close range due to its bizarre shape, striking colors, unwariness, and poor flight, it is not considered endangered. In fact, its survival seems to be more assured than that of many other endemics of its range. In Brazil, indigenous people sometimes collect the eggs for food, and the adults are occasionally hunted, but in general this is rare, as it is reputed to have a bad taste. While its preferred habitats, mangrove and riverine forest, are disappearing quickly in some regions, it is less threatened than terra firma forest, which is the primary target for deforestation in the Amazon. The Hoatzin therefore remains fairly common in a large part of its range. The Hoatzin is the national bird of Guyana. Footnotes, for example, that there is a major clade of near passerines, and that the charadiforms are quite distinct. Originally believed to be of late Miocene age some 10 5 million years old. The bone was found in association with fossils of the monkey Cupitheca sarmientoi, which today is usually considered of early or middle Miocene, possibly 18 but at least some 12 million years of age. References. External links: Cornell Lab of Ornithology, Mystery Birds, Hoatzin Adults and Young. Retrieved June 16, 2008. Hoatzin Videos, Photos and Sounds on the Internet Bird Collection.